Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of In the Prog Seat. It's Tuesday night. The crew is here. Today is Q&A day. You guys remember a couple weeks ago, we posted a little video. We asked you guys to type in some questions for us for a future episode. And there were well over 300 of them. So I picked out a bunch, and we're going to tackle as many as we can here today in roughly an hour or so. So let me introduce the crew. We'll start at the bottom. We got Chad Hutchinson in the house. We've got Chuck Alvarez in the house. We've got the professor of Prague, Ken Golden. Our center square, one of the two twin towers from Chicago, George Lemie. All the way from Scotland, Stephen Reed. Our other tower from Chicago, Mr. Louis Nasser. And one of the three New Yorkers here on the panel today, Mr. Eric Porter. What's going on, everybody?
Hey, good evening.
Hey, what's up?
So, given everybody the questions that we're going to try and tackle today, they've been looking them over, and we're going to do our best to answer as many as we can. So I want to thank everybody who submitted questions. Obviously, we can't answer them all, and there were a lot of questions about things that we've talked about and answered many times here on the channel, and some other stuff that doesn't really apply. So we picked the ones that we thought would be fun for people to hear us talk about. There's a bunch that are for specific people on the panel, some that are fairly general. So we'll go through them. If it's one for a specific person, I'll call that person out, and I'm hoping that I can remember to list everybody's name who actually submitted questions. So the first one from Alex Posilkin9683. This is for Ken. Ken, have you ever been a producer on any of the albums you've put out? And if not, have any of the bands you've worked with asked for creative input from you specifically for an album?
The answer is sort of. I'm not like Gus Dungeon. I'm not standing in the control room and throwing out suggestions. I work in a broader sense. When I really early on, when I first started the label, I would have more input in things such as song sequencing. I'm a strong proponent of song sequencing. I'm not a musician, so I'm not going to tell a guy, hey, and that bass part sucked or whatever. But I have had situations where I've been given mixes, rough mixes, and we've had to make changes. And I've actually had a situation where I had to tell one of the musicians that he had to go back and re-record his parts. But in general, I get involved, as I said, things like sequencing, artwork. If band asks me for help, I will help them. But I'm not a producer in the classic sense. Gotcha. Of why am I drawing a blank?
Almost like an advisor, right? Like an executive producer, right?
Yes, yeah. Translation for executive producer, the guy who writes the checks. So, right. So I'm the guy that writes the checks. So yeah. So in that sense, yeah, I produce. So
cool.
I don't engineer. So
there you go. Okay. All right, our next one is just a general question for the team from Spaceballs. So after all these years and decades as Prague listeners, fans, and for some of you musicians, what keeps you going? What keeps the flame burning and makes you still search for new stuff, rediscover old stuff, and celebrate the classics? And have you ever had phases where you thought you lost your passion for Prague? Anybody want to tackle that one?
I can throw one out there.
Okay, Eric, go for it.
I think number one, we're always going back and the team here. I just got the fusion bug. George feeds me all kinds of fusion. Ken will tell us when new bands are coming. Pete, you do the same thing. I review stuff for you on the site. So you're sending me stuff. I know Steven does as well. We're always getting new things. And I think the passion for it is that I know there's a lot of people that maybe just listen to the classic stuff and that's what got them into it. But there's so much out there. And I think even with SOT and us talking with each other, it blows my mind the amount of music that's out there. You just kind of have to be open to it. And you don't get tired of it because there's always something different. Prague is, whether it's Prague or whatever, there's such a wide scope of music out there. You just have to look. And I think having you guys are my resource usually, but You know, even in comments, people will say, hey, I love the show. Have you guys checked out this band? And then you might go out and check it out just because. So that's my take on it anyway. The channel kind of keeps things going for me.
Yeah, I would second that, Eric. The umbrella that is progressive rock is so wide, whether you like something like neo-progressive all the way to something avant-garde. There's so much out there. There's still like I like the surprises in progressive rock. There's always, you know, you listen to something like, oh, that was cool, you know. There's still plenty of room for that.
Mhm.
And really, if you try to not listen to it and you listen to FM radio, you're going to be bored and sickened within about 10 minutes. That's if you even get out of a commercial break. So, so going back into this stuff, you get all the virtuosity and all the stuff that we like. And like you said, there's just so much there. And I think part of his question was, have you ever lost that fire? And for me personally, yeah, I did. I mean, I had it for Nearfest because I had to. But once Nearfest ended in 2012, I was burnt. It was a good 10 years until I really started getting really interested in buying new music again. And to second Eric again, being part of this group has really lit that fire. You guys have turned me on to all kinds of great stuff, new and old. And it's been great. But it's really fun to be going back and discovering some of these new bands, especially when Ken's like, oh, this new thing came out, go check it out. Or we do an album study like Coliseum, which is a great example. Coliseum 2. I'd heard the name, never listened to it, and I thought that was fantastic. So yeah, discovering old stuff that I just never got to is also very exciting. So that all kind of fits under the umbrella. Like there is so much there from 1960 whatever to now to dig into. It's just a never-ending pool of delicious music.
Yeah, I think too, when you listen to one style of music so heavily for a long period of time, you can easily get burnt out on it. Like I dove heavily into prog and fusion like at the beginning of the 90s because, you know, at the end of the 80s, all I listened to was metal and hard rock for the most part, and that was kind of going by the wayside and other things were getting more popular. So I dove into prog real heavy, but it wasn't until probably about like maybe 2005 or 6 I was pretty burnt out on it, and I got back into metal again, and I got into like extreme metal, like death metal, black metal, and all that sort of thing, and that kept me going, you know, for a number of years until I got burnt out on that a little bit too, and then I got back into prog. So it was kind of good for me to take a little breather for a couple of years, even though I still kind of listened to prog. Not as heavily as I did though in the 90s and the early 2000s. So I mean that can happen very easily if you just kind of like infiltrate yourself with so much of one style of music for a period of time. Anybody else have that happen where you just kind of dropped off of prog for a few years, maybe longer?
Yeah. Don't you think a lot of that, for me, I think a lot of it had to do with the fact like in the 90s, there wasn't a lot of good prog. I mean, for me,
It's the first.
I mean, not saying there was none. I mean, of course there was things, and you know, I made a business out of it. But you know, for me, I got more interested in progressive metal. I thought, you know, starting in the late '90s, I thought that was far more interesting. I see, you know, I think for me, and I interact with a lot of people. I have a lot of customers, and I think it's the nature of progressive music that you're always looking to hear the next thing. At least that's the way I'm wired. If I like a certain style and there's more like that, yeah, I want to hear it, you know. And you never know where that leads you. Could lead you to fusion. To me, it led me to fusion, and then ultimately it led me to jazz. I spend as much time listening to jazz as I do progressive rock. You never know. That's the beautiful nature of progressive music. You never know where it's going to take you. And ultimately, you may find yourself spending time listening to types of music you never thought you would listen to. But ultimately, you know, if it's good quality music, good quality progressive music, you'll find your way back to it.
Yeah, you know, Eric mentioned some before that. I want to throw it over to Stephen for a second here. So, you know, when you write for a webzine like SOT, and we've been doing it for a long time, you often don't have a chance to like stop listening to anything because he's smiling because he gets that box for me. It's got like 25, 30 CDs, and that's he's got to immerse himself in that for a bunch of months, right? So like, and you never know what you're going to get in one of those boxes, right? I never know what's going to come in the mail every day, and I've got this whole promo box sitting here that's got stuff of every possible style of music you can imagine. So Stephen, what's it like for you to have all that at your disposal, plus the stuff you're buying and trading and all that sort of thing? I mean, it's never ending, right?
It moves from phenomenal to overwhelming sometimes. You open a box that's, as you say, got 20, 25, 30 CDs in it. Odds on I maybe know who 4 or 5 of those artists are. There's everything from really small-time independent artists in these boxes right the way through to kind of major labels like AFM and various things like that. So sometimes you open it and you go, okay, I know what that is, I know what that is. Then there's this pile that's left, you think, I have just no idea. So you kind of delve in, and sometimes you're one listen away from the best thing you've ever heard.
Right.
At least in the last little while. And sometimes
or the complete opposite, right?
Not the case. Yeah, sometimes it's interesting. Yeah, absolutely. So the difficult thing, I suppose, is balancing. There's a question further on somewhere about balance and how do you listen and how often and various things. One of the challenges I find with what we do is balancing between what you've asked us or sent us for review, what I'm sent in my emails and various things. Other people are kind enough to send me things through the post for review. Then there's what I buy, and then there's the recommendations that come your way, and it's balancing all that out. We had a conversation earlier today between us all about Happy the Man. Never heard Happy the Man. Don't know anything about them at all. It's just a band that has, until I joined this group, never heard the name. And Chad was like, go on, get on it. And you think, well, yeah, I will. But once I've done these 17 albums I've got in my hand that's in this list that I need to do for that reason, for this reason, for that. And it's great fun. I'm not in any shape or form suggesting that that's not a privilege, because it is. Not only do I get a lot of music that I don't necessarily have to pay for, but I then get to write down what I think about it. And some people are kind enough to read that and not just dismiss it as utter nonsense. So, yeah, it's good. The crux of it is, though, you are genuinely, you never know what you're going to get, not just in a box like that, but if you search Bandcamp or if you're using YouTube or reading the comments and say, that's 3 people have mentioned this band now, so I really should go and check them out. And sometimes, not every time, you genuinely think, wow, that is phenomenal. That keeps the flame alive for me, because you just never know when you're going to stumble across a band that for the next few years are going to be really, really important in what you listen to.
Yeah. And just so everybody knows, the amount of music and new bands and albums that gets recommended from various folks on this Zoom today to all of us, it never ends, right? I mean, I go through the same thing on the Hudson Valley Squares. We have like these little Facebook private threads, and that's how we all communicate about all these various shows. And it happens on the Curse of the Collectors. It happens in the Monsters Den. Everybody's constantly recommending albums and bands and movies, and it's never ending. So we're all learning and digesting new stuff just for fun, because we turn each other on to new stuff in addition to stuff we have to listen to talk about on this show, or stuff we have to review to do on the webzine, or whatever it might be for Ken to talk about on Fridays. I mean, it's never ending. So there's a lot. It's a lot. So, but it's fun. As Stephen said, it's fun.
It's frustrating to me when I meet somebody who doesn't want to hear something new, who's not interested in hearing.
Who are you talking about, Ken?
Oh, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, when I leave this planet, I would like to have heard everything I could possibly have heard. So
don't have to like it, but
no, you don't have to like it. But yeah.
No, but I want to know if it's out there. I want to experience it. And, that's what keeps me going. That's why I keep. There's always something to discover. Always.
All right, we got a couple questions coming up for individuals here. So, Lewis, you're first. So this is from Manuel Pear. And it says, he's fascinated by Lewis's life as a physics professor. I'd love to ask him if he approaches prog music, the stuff he does with his own bands, with any kind of analytical thought like the scientist he is, or if it's a complete outlet where he follows his emotions more. This is applicable to learning prog tracks or composition. So maybe you want to...
All right. Well, that's the short answer of it is yes. As a matter of fact, I am in a band with Matthias Olsson, who from Anglagard, Necromonkey, and about 30 other bands. Ramses Luna, Tim McCaskey, and Aaron Geller were called the Devil's Staircase. And the mission statement of that band is to write music which essentially uses the same process which nature uses to determine shape, except that we're determining musical form. And that is just mathematical iteration with random errors. So instead of the normal rock thing or the normal prog thing, we basically use mathematics to set the musical form. And this is really helpful when you get stuck. I think we all have a style. And suddenly when you have something else dictating what you do, it suddenly becomes something that surprises you. And that is great. So yeah, I certainly do it. And in fact, I have a National Science Foundation research grant to study the thermodynamic foundation of musical harmony. So that's actually what I do for a living. Now, as far as how I learn stuff, I have a two-step process. The first step process, I mean, as a physicist and just as a music lover and also a giant nerd, I write stuff down. When we have the album studies, I will sit here and I will transcribe the stuff that we've been asked to listen to, because I really want to understand it. And for me, you know, putting little dots and lines is a way in which I really get to see it, right? And when I'm trying to learn it, the first step is just obsessively reading it, counting it. But then I never again count. Then the way that I do it is once I get it under my fingers, I am thinking of themes. I'm listening to blocks. And that's how I go through it. I'm not counting bar by bar. And I think that's the way that I can actually get myself into it. And the rest of the band does similar things. So yeah, there is a method to my madness. It's not just random, but it is very nerdy, and a lot of people find it very, very difficult to do that. But that's how we do it.
Nerdy's good, right? That's what we do. We're all nerds.
Absolutely, nerds, my people. I don't give a fuck.
All right, so how about for our king nerd, George? You got a question from Burnett179. George, if there's a country in the world where he hasn't got a prog album from, pretty sure he mentioned every single one. But is there a specific country, George, where you know that some really good prog or music or fusion music has come out of that you haven't investigated yet? Is there any that you know of?
No, because if I knew that, I would go investigate it. I know there's for every continent, there's a few countries I don't think I've got anything. Like North America, I don't have any Haitian, Bahamian, Belize. Europe, there's probably Bulgaria, Portugal, Andorra. I mean, nothing comes to mind. And of course, Africa. There's only
Bulgaria, George, Bulgaria had a lot of good, interesting stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure there is. They like a lot of odd time over there. But yeah, and a lot of African countries. I think there's only like 5 African countries in my collection. So yeah, there's quite a few still.
All right, so this question is from me. What is your favorite country as far as music you like that comes from? What's your favorite country?
Hey, that's tough. Japan's up there. Of course, there's a lot of good stuff from England through the years. And right here, US, there's a lot of my favorite bands are from here.
Oh, what a homer.
Well, I'm glad you said Japan, George, because that's a little plug for our show coming up on Friday, 4 Fusion Friday. It's all about a bunch of albums from Japan. So a bunch of you have asked. I got an email today from someone said, when are you guys going to talk about Japan on either In the Prog Seat or 4 Fusion Friday? I'm like, funny you asked. Stay tuned Friday night. So yeah, this Friday night, 4 Fusion Friday, Japan. So yeah, excellent. All right, here's a general question for the group, I guess. Which album or bands are you most tired of talking about? Anyone?
Yes.
All the big ones.
Yeah, the big 6.
Same,
the
the big 6.
it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm like burnt out on that.
They're good reference points, but
Mhm.
Eric and actually George too, as we're doing album studies, have picked some great ones. Coliseum 2 and Happy the Man if we can get more second, third, and fourth tier bands in there and get some people excited and talking about them, I think we're doing our job. We can't just talk about Yes, Genesis, Tull, Rush, and ELP for the rest of our lives.
Very true. Yeah, I'd agree. I would agree. So on that same token, this is from Michael Dalloway, 1988, by the way. Which albums or bands do you wish you talked about more? Are there any or off the top of your head, any like bands or albums that you wish we could talk about more, spend more time with?
That's what I.
I thought for
Yeah,
sure.
prog-
I thought
I'd
Chuck
say
was
any
going to say
prog
Ultra
metal
Punk.
in general.
Prog metal in general, yeah.
Yeah.
There's so many. I mean, there's so many great bands in the last 20 years alone.
Mm-hmm.
Really great, right? That nobody talks about. And I think it's really a matter of being willing to discover new stuff. Like, to me, I don't understand that a lot of people say this in the comments, like, there's nothing good to hear. All the best music was done in it ended in 1970. Insert your fucking number, I don't care. And it's all bullshit. It's just such absolute bullshit.
Laziness.
Yes, you just can't be bothered. What you want is a circle jerk of like-minded people telling you that what you did when you were young was the best thing ever, and that's it. That has nothing to do with even the spirit of music, let alone progressive music. It's totally inward looking, and it's just boring and lazy and stupid. So there is so much to talk about. Even if we talk like bands that started more than 20 years ago, but approximately around that time, there's still a lot. And all the time there's new stuff. I can't keep up, and I'm not complaining. I love that. I mean, I need to always hear new things. It keeps me interested. It keeps me challenged. It keeps me motivated to practice and to play. If I hear somebody who's doing great stuff, it makes me happy for them, and it just makes me realize that I have to work harder. It's fucking awesome. So I love it. I genuinely love it. I don't understand. There's so many bands we could talk about all the time. And we do, right? But those are the videos that many people don't watch.
Well,
Right.
yeah, and that's where I wanted to go next with this. It's not part of the question, but we were, just so everybody knows. So we did, on the last episode, we did this great album study for the Happy the Man's debut, right? And we were all really jacked to do that, and it came out great. And it's one of those bands that they were never really big, but if you're a real serious prog fan, you know who they are, and you probably love them. So we love talking about it, but yet hardly anybody watched this video. And it's frustrating for us, because if we do an album study on a Yes album or Genesis or Pink Floyd or Rush, 10,000 people or more will watch it instantly. But yet, we get a lot of comments from people saying, we want you guys to talk about more obscure stuff. But the people who are more vocal in the comments who say that are a minority compared to the people who actually watch this program. So we want to talk about more obscure stuff, and we're going to. If you're not along for the ride on some of that stuff, well, you're missing out, right? You're really missing out.
We're gonna sick Luis on you.
That's right.
We're talking about the same big five bands all the time. It's
No, too many people want their comfort food.
Yeah,
right.
that's
Yeah,
not
and I
right.
get that. I get that.
But I'm also in agreement with prog metal as well. There's so much great prog metal out there, that we still haven't even touched upon. And, we have a couple of experts over here that continue to talk very well about them. And I think that it's time that we talk more about prog metal. There's so many great bands, that we can talk about. Fate's Warning, what's with that, Meshuggah. We can go on with all these bands over there. And I'm looking forward to speaking more about them and actually perhaps letting people from out there learn about them as well.
Younger fans, to them, prog metal, prog rock, it's all interchangeable. They're just as comfortable talking about Haken as they are maybe Yes or so. They'll talk about Dream Theater, but they also want to talk about Marillion. I mean, it's all interchangeable to them. It's the older viewers, listeners who want, as I said, they want their comfort food, and maybe they're adverse to listening to prog metal or talking about prog metal. They're not interested in learning. They want to know, what was John Anderson eating when he recorded Elias Sunhillo, you know.
Bird
Mushrooms.
Well, you know what? It's not just prog metal. It's like the avant-garde side of things. If we did a show on Upsilon Acrux,
Yes.
oh,
Mhm.
you know, some of the weirder stuff, like do a whole cuneiform show. Would people be open to that? I would hope they would be.
Ian Cars just shot his load.
I know.
I'm still
Wipe the screen off. Wipe the screen off.
Yeah, but it's true. Like I wish that, like, you know, I said I listen to a lot of jazz, but not to say that we should like have a show on John Coltrane, but I think that there's a lot of interesting late 60s, 70s electric jazz, which to me crosses over into very interesting areas. And, you know,
What about Keith Jarrett's 1970 American band?
Yeah, and to that
Mhm.
point, we had,
Mhm.
and in fact, I put it on the list. A couple people asked us to do a show talking about the ECM label and what that's all about. Some of the bands on that roster.
Eberhard Weber. Mhm.
yeah, I mean, yeah, Pete, I on our show that, you know, we did on Friday, you know, I held up the Vocal Kriegel album that he did with Eberhard Weber and all those great guys. I sold out of it in minutes.
Yeah.
You know, there's interest in it.
Yeah.
It's not as much interest as King Crimson, but you know, there is interest in it.
Yeah.
You know, and as I said, and as I said many times, I see a path from prog rock to fusion to jazz rock. I call electric jazz, back to jazz, and after a while, it kind of blurs. You know,
But you can also take it the other way, Ken. If you listen to contemporary classical music like Bartok, have you ever seen, and I invite viewers who haven't done this, if you look on YouTube, there are young kids, going back to what was being said about the younger generation who are not stuck in the past, who will play drums to Bartok. And that's how you will instantly recognize that this guy was actually laying down a lot of prog rock blueprints in his string quartets.
right.
You know, there's and of course Keith Emerson heard that and he brought it into ELP and Robert Fripp and all these guys, because that stuff is, Frank Zappa did similar things. So there's so many ways to listen. I would encourage people to try to search for the commonalities, the seeds, the cross pollinations, not be so like fucking librarians, like, oh, I only like this, and therefore anything outside of this box I don't care about, because you really are missing out. You are missing out, and it's not as distant as you imagine. I mean, in Western intonation, there's 12 notes. There's only, you know, it's a beautiful thing to watch these things talk to each other, and I never understand why people don't really feel that joy. I couldn't stop listening if I wanted to. There's that phrase by Bernard Shaw that says music is brandy of the damned. I think he said it because he hated the neighbors because they were always playing and he was just going nuts with them. But he was more right than he knew. And I at least am always thirsty. So I need it, right? I hear it in my head, even if it's not playing. So it's just a beautiful thing. And I would encourage everybody, if you've made it this far into this show, I mean, branch out. Try a new record a month, something completely unknown to you. Just try it. Let it seep into your head and see what happens.
Yeah, it's easy. Put it on in the car. Put it on while you're working. Anything. It's easy.
Just let the discomfort become your new best friend. All of a sudden, your life will be so much better. Truly.
I'm gonna throw a record out since we're talking about this stuff. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Brad Meldau. So Brad Meldau is a world-class jazz pianist. Not a fusion player, but he put out an album last year called Jacob's Ladder. And it turned out that here's this esteemed, brilliant jazz pianist who grew up with prog rock, and he was a closet prog rock fan. And he's did this amazing album, which is basically his interpretation of and morphing and cannibalizing and just doing classic pieces of prog. You'll hear Gentle Giant, you hear Rush, and I mean overtly. You'll hear the lyrics from a Rush song in there. Periphery, yes, he's interested in all these things. So this is a guy who took jazz and he turned it on its head by going old school prog rock. And it's, you know, some of you guys know Jeff Wagner. Jeff, great writer and a prog rock nut, right? I mean, Jeff, you know, thinks it's like one of the most important albums in like the last decade or so. I mean, he was absolutely blown away. It's a masterpiece. And it's Brad Meldau, and it's called Jacob's Ladder. You could hear it on his Bandcamp page, and you'll listen to it. It's a jazz album, but you're going to hear Rush. You're going to hear like a jazz, sort of like a contemporary jazz interpretation of Rush. You'll hear quotes from Gentle Giant, and yes, and Periphery. He'll throw that in there. You know, you're not going to hear any gent guitar or anything like that. You know, it's nothing like that. But it's very, very. I mean, it's the epitome of progressive music. It's quite interesting, and I should say it sold pretty terribly, but at least for me.
Of course it did.
Because you know, he's not playing a Mellotron, but you know, it's and he's got Chris Steele on there. He's very good musicians. He plays a Fender Rhodes, and there's some actually there is some Mellotron on there. You know, he goes electric, and it's interesting. So
he's played with Joshua Redman, for those who are from the jazz world.
Yep.
Joshua Redman is the son of the late Dewey Redman. I used to play with Keith Jarrett back in the 70s. But he's pretty badass. I've seen him live with Joshua Redman a couple of times, and he's pretty much badass.
You know, you're listening, and all of a sudden you hear little bits of cogs and cogs, and it's like, where the fuck did that come from? I mean, it's brilliant. It's brilliant the way it's together.
All right. I'm going to answer this one real quick from just another malenthusiast. What would have happened if Tony Iommi stayed with Jethro Tull? I think it's a good thing Tony Iommi didn't stay with Jethro Tull, because Jethro Tull was allowed to be what Jethro Tull were meant to be, and Black Sabbath were allowed to be what Black Sabbath were to be. So yeah, I don't think that would have ever worked.
Not at all.
And I'm glad it. Again, love Tony, love Tull, but they did what they were supposed to be apart from.
But didn't Tony say that he learned how to run a band from watching Ian run Jethro Tull?
Yep.
It helped him be much more organized and less. I think
Less
that was
chaotic.
It was a good thing, but I agree with you 100%. Let Tull be Tull, let Sabbath be Sabbath.
Yep.
All right, so I'm gonna have fun with this one. So I included one question in here which was really negative, and the guy is always negative, and does he even watch this show? I doubt it. But this is from Earache My Eye 8345. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So
Wait,
he
surprising
said,
us?
why does this channel continually try to glorify the Mellotron as the greatest instrument, not only in Prague, but in the history of music? When we were in high school playing in bands and going to every concert that came to town, any album that had Mellotron on it was automatically considered substandard and completely uncool. To this day, I won't listen to anything with Mellotron on it.
I'm sorry, he's got lousy friends.
Exactly.
You know what? I don't think anybody here has ever said it's the greatest instrument ever. Some of us very much like the sound of it. Ken talks about it a lot. It gives a vibe. It's a certain feel. It can be haunting. It's a great atmosphere. And when it's done well, it's really powerful. So suck it.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with it. None of us ever said it's the greatest instrument in the history of music. It just complements this style of music. And if you don't like Prague, why are you putting this question in anyway? It's like, because obviously, it's ridiculous. I just wanted to call it out because I think it's the most, out of all the questions that we got, this was easily the most ridiculous one. And so, no, there's nothing uncool about the Mellotron. Hey, for me, guitar is always going to be the number one thing, but there's plenty of ripping guitar in prog music. So just because it has Mellotron on it doesn't mean it's uncool. So yeah, whatever. Earache My Eye. Later. All right.
Luis had his hand up.
Yes, Luis.
I'm just wondering, who is this fucking ass clown, and why? And why does he think that whatever clique of meatheads are essentially determining what is good and bad is what is good and bad forever.
Right.
Did his development stall at age 13? That'll be my first question. My second question is the mellotron is nothing more or less than the first ever sampler.
Yep.
And it is a beautiful thing. It is a highly unpredictable, difficult to tour with machine, but when you have it in a studio and when you know what you're doing with it, those old scratchy tapes have a timbre and a texture that can be just as well at home in prog as in metal, as in some avant-garde stuff. I mean, just the fact that this guy, whatever his fucking name is, thinks that it's just a prog instrument. I mean, that just says a lot about him. I mean, what the fuck does this guy know? Nothing.
I've heard it on metal albums. I've heard it on metal albums.
Sun Ra was using that back in the 60s.
I mean, dude, there are libraries full of everything you don't know. Hit them.
Yeah, I'd like to know what albums he's not listening to because it has Mellotron on it.
I actually don't think he knows. I think it's all made up nonsense. That's what I think.
Kind of like Fire Festival 2 tickets.
Yeah.
From Kevin Lethem 6616, what albums are you sick of being labeled as prog, but aren't prog? Music from the Elder by Kiss is my pick. It's not a prog album. Sorry, guys. It's a concept album. Doesn't mean it's prog. Anybody else got one?
Yep.
Yeah,
Anything by Iron Maiden. Just because Steve Harris wants to play bass for 3 weeks before the song stutters into life does not make it progressive rock or interesting. But anyway.
Yeah, long intros and keyboards on Seventh Son doesn't make Seventh Son prog. It's not.
This might be unpopular with some of you, but I'm going to say Radiohead. I just don't think they're prog. I think they're, they may be interesting to some, but I think they're a little too emo. They have some elements that are prog, but they're not a prog band. Not for me.
Roxy Music post Brian Eno.
I don't know. I just find this whole is this prog thing almost as stupid as the previous question.
Well, it's the ultimate stupid question, to be honest.
It really is.
Like,
ask a stupid question, get a stupid answer.
All right, so I got two questions from Sal Randonzo. For Pete and Ken, how do you think your passion for comic books and movies affect or not your choice of favorite prog bands and or albums?
You're muted, Ken.
Ken, you're muted.
Wow, no wonder it was so nice in here.
I want to know why your dog has the Watcher of the Skies collar on.
Oh, that's Bonehead. She had surgery recently, so hope she's okay.
So the question, how do you think your passion for comic books? They did in a sense. I started reading comic books since I'm an old man, Silver Age. And I had an interest in guys like Jack Kirby, Steranko, Steve Ditko, all the classics. And that got me interested in art in general. And then when you'd see artwork by guys like Roger Dean, and of course, Giger, H.R. Giger, that was something that would always spur my interest. Art in general. I'd see album covers, great album covers, and I'd be pulling out, what the hell is this? So yeah, I could see there was, in a disjointed way, what I'm trying to say is I could see some continuity from my interest in comics, comic art, surrealism. I'm very interested in. You guys have been to my house. I have a few paintings. They're all of a surrealistic nature, and that kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of the music that I listen to. That was the cover art of these albums. You look at a Moody Blues album, or you look at a Yes album cover. What the hell is this thing? I want to know what the hell this thing is.
Yeah, I don't think it really influenced or affected me at all. I mean, other than, you know, maybe some of the cover art and maybe like, you know, lyrics of like early Rush albums and stuff, that kind of sci-fi thing maybe tied in directly, but I don't think like it really affected me much at all. You know, comic books and movies and prog, it's kind of all different. And then Sal asked another question to me: which prog bands or songs motivate you when you work out at the gym? I got to be honest with you, I don't listen to prog at all when I work out. I need something. I listen to much heavier stuff when I work out. It's like I listen to metal or prog metal or hard rock, and it's, you know, it's prog to me is more kind of mood music. It's not motivate, lift weights, and run fast on the elliptical type of thing. I mean, I might occasionally, but for the most part, I don't work out to prog. And for Chuck says, Sal says, although I consider Van de Graaff Generator a top-tier progressive band, which top-tier prog guitarist do you think would have elevated Van de Graaff Generator to the top tier of prog bands like Yes or Genesis?
Well, Robert Fripp worked with them quite a bit. But I just think that they're just one of those unique bands that probably didn't need to have a guitar on it. You know, Peter Hamill, while he's no virtuoso. But so he added his we're not talking about the vocals now. I don't think that that they needed the guitar for most of their music, as intense as it is. I would have left it as is. And then there's also the story that I told you about speaking to Steve Hackett one time, and I asked him about Van de Graaff Generator. He basically was like, "Oh, too intense," you know. But he did like the guys, and so he said he was friends with all four of them. But I just wanted to go back to the comic book and the comic book and music in Prague. Is that Sal also forgot that I also went to a school for art, and it was in the high school of art and design that I also got to learn about a lot of these progressive rock bands. You know, I had a friend that was able to make tapes for me that introduced me to bands like Yes, Pink Floyd, Genesis, King Crimson. And, you know, when you think about it, Neil Adam has drawn album covers for the Groundhogs.
Yep.
You know, what else? He's drawn album covers for Groundhogs and a few other bands out there. So, as a matter of fact, I think Jim Steranko even did one, if I'm not mistaken. So, and I know that Jack Kirby has as well. You know, so that's my take on that as well. But yeah, no. Once again, get back to Van de Graaff Generator. No, I can't see any other guitarists working with them.
But I think Fripp would have been the only logical choice if they were going to go that route, because he had that little bit of experience, and their music is edgy enough where I think his style would fit. Like I couldn't see Steve Hackett or Latimer or anybody else doing that kind of music. You know?
They couldn't have a melodic guitarist playing with them.
No.
You know, they needed some of the touch of evil.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And here's a question for everybody, and I'm going to put myself on mute and go let these two fools out over here driving me crazy. And feel free to go around for this. This is a really good one. This is from Jimmy Page, 2843. He goes, do you have trouble getting rid of albums that were absolute bombs, or you have to keep them in your collection? And whoever wants to start, and then I'll be back in a second.
Well, from my experience, I'll tell you, people on Discogs will buy anything. I even got rid of Metallica's Saint Anger. So there you go.
Short answer for me, no. If I don't like it, it's in the sell pile. I don't understand keeping stuff you don't like. It's stupid.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a completist, so I do like to keep things that are part of a distinct band's collection. I don't necessarily split up a discography if there's one album by them that I don't like. But in general, these days, and that is quite a new thing, maybe last 5 years or so, if it stinks, it doesn't have to stink in my house.
You guys, did any of you guys ever have seller's remorse?
I had it often. I had that often, and this is why I don't get rid of things that fast. Because for a while I would hear things, hate them, and then years later I would hear them again and love them.
Yeah.
So if I already bought it for whatever reason, I tend to hang on to it and give it 2 or 3 different shots at different times. And only when I'm sure that I still don't like it, then I go to Reckless, and Reckless will pick it up. You know, they pick up this stuff. So it's a beautiful thing, because then somebody else can enjoy it, you know?
Yep.
Just not me.
George, I can answer your question. Laziness. I have CDs I don't care for or listen to anymore. I've been too lazy to do a Discogs or something. So that's my winter project, is to clean house a bit, make room for some other stuff. But yeah, I got to get a little motivation to do that.
Yeah, you guys inspired me to do a purge. There's a white box back here on the floor. That's all up on Discogs for sale. So I got rid of.
I've sold thousands. I've sold thousands of records from CDs from my collection on Discogs.
I would assume most of us have a space issue, so just taking up the space thing doesn't make any sense.
That's
I knocked down a wall.
You're not wrong.
I'll go into my mother-in-law's apartment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of try and strike a balance with what Lewis was saying there, because I kind of have a rotation policy in terms of, if I buy something and it doesn't necessarily click, I don't just put it in the bin or put it up for sale. It goes in the collection. And if after X amount of time, when I'm putting the new stuff in and therefore taking the stuff that I don't want out, I look at it and go, well, it still hasn't worked, or it's never come out again, then it's time to say see you later. So yeah, I give everything time, but ultimately, if after a long time I still go, then it's out.
I tend to, for me, if it's a band that I really like and I'm, I got to collect them all type of thing. Even if there's one like stinker in the collection, but I have to have them all, I'll keep the stinker just so I have all of them. And but yeah, I'm totally with Steven. If I like take a chance on a band and I buy an album, I'm like, that's okay, right? And after I've listened to it a little bit or reviewed it, whatever, and it goes on the shelf, then I, once or twice a year I go through everything and I'm like, and I go back to them like, okay, I haven't reached for it again. Maybe I put it on the iPod. I haven't listened to it since then. I'm like, yeah, I don't think I need this, because if I haven't reached for it in 6 months or a year, I'm not going to listen to this ever again. And if I haven't bought anything else by it, Yeah.
Pete, you were away, so I think Ken asked the good question. Do you have seller's remorse? Have you ever had anything and you're like, you bought it because you sold it? Okay.
Yeah, I have gotten rid of stuff in that fashion, and then like a decade later, I get back into the band and I'm like, I used to have that, and I go and buy it again. Hasn't happened a lot, but it's happened. It's happened for sure.
Let me tell you, when you collect vinyl,
I know you've been telling me stories. Yeah,
I sold my copy of Spring because it was. I told you I had these albums. They were museum pieces. I was afraid to play them. They were worth so much money that seriously, you're going to put a $2,000 record on your turntable. God forbid you scratch it. It's now a $1,200 record. It was so bad. I wouldn't want to take the albums off the shelves to show people, because I wouldn't want to put any potential wear on the sleeve. So it got ridiculous. So I sold them, and then years later, I'm rebuying them, except I can't afford them. So, I still like Spring. I sold my copy of Spring, and I'd really like to own a copy of Spring, a vinyl copy of Spring. And
so you couldn't play it.
Well, I said, well, maybe I'd buy like a German pressing, which is only $400 instead of $2,000 or something. It's stupid. I mean, it's
you can look at it while he's listening to it on YouTube.
Yeah, right.
Ken, me, this
you can't look at it, Chad. You can't even touch it.
Don't even look at it.
That is so crazy. This is like the guys who buy comic books not to read them. They laminate them and they store them away from the sunlight so that the pages don't get yellow.
Hey, listen, I got guys who buy colored vinyl from me all the time. They don't even crack them open. So
that to me is a borderline pathology.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's crazy. But, I had one guy years ago. He bought albums from me, and I took the records out of the sleeve to ship it to him so he wouldn't get seam splits. And he sent me the nastiest email that I ruined the value of the albums because I took the records out of the sleeve. They're no longer sealed. They don't have any value now. And he says, you're not going to stay in business very long.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you break a piece off and smack him with it?
I mean, I said, don't you listen to these things?
Nope.
That's the point.
Yeah,
what's the point?
That's the problem. That sometimes they become, the expensive stuff. They become museum pieces.
Yeah.
It's a little different for even CDs now are getting expensive.
Yep.
For me, if I can't play it, it has no useful purpose.
Right.
Yep.
It's like t-shirts. It's like books, instruments. I'll never understand why people collect instruments.
Well, the good thing, Luis, about digital though is that you can stream it. you could rip it, right? You could
Yeah.
listen to it lossless.
But it's not the same. What's
No, it's
I
not
said,
the same.
I said I have a plethora of music that's streamable, and so, but I would rather prefer to have the physical copies of a lot of this stuff, and most of it I don't even take out of my closet. I just don't want to just make the mess of it. So it's basically the same thing that we speak about space. I don't want to keep the mess around it. So, but there's a lot of stuff that I would love to be able to keep on to and buy physical CDs. So,
Chuck, I think it's time you came out of the closet.
that's it.
Chuck Cave.
That's it.
He's a Mets fan. He's got enough problems.
Yeah, I know, right?
All right, we got another multi question one from user 005CW blah 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 blah. First question is for me. According to YouTube statistics, do you know the countries that listen the most to the show in the Prog Seat? Yes. Yeah, we have really good analytics for YouTube. So for this particular show on the channel, and most of them, folks from the United States that's the biggest percentage of viewers. Number 2 is the UK, and number 3 is Canada. That's pretty consistent across all the programs we do on SOT. And just so everybody knows, the age group that watches this the most, this particular show, is 45 to 65. Okay. Ken, what are the most popular countries for progressive rock album sales, not including prog metal or fusion?
I think I understand the question. I would say, surprisingly, I'd say Norway. Well, Scandinavia in general.
Okay.
So there's a ton of bands coming out of Norway and Scandinavia. We sell a lot of them. I mean, sure, there's a lot. We sell a lot of English bands as well, but those are really it. I mean, like things on the Apollon label, Charisma label out of Norway. You have Agusa out of Sweden, and there are other bands that pop up, bands from Denmark. And that's where a lot of our sales come from.
Okay, wow, interesting. Lewis, with your travel experience in several places in the world, where do you think people are more open to prog? Top 3 countries.
That's a crazy question. Only because I haven't really been all over the world. I would say that the one place for sure where I just heard prog being played on the street, in people's houses, in radios, and restaurants, surprisingly, it was Chile.
Okay.
People in Chile listen to a lot of rock, and they listen to a lot of prog rock. I know that also if you go down Santiago and you enter a record store, which is something I love doing. I love going to record stores. I was surprised to see how much prog was being sold. So that was also unexpected. In Germany, in Mainz and in Frankfurt and other cities that I've been to, record stores do have prog available, like as lots of prog, not just whatever flavor du jour isn't happening in the pop world. And I know from friends and other people that have, I mean, the shows that we played in Germany were in very small areas, but they were well attended, and I think for what they were, I mean, we played with Mike Kutz, acoustic guitars, right? It's not like it was a big production, but a lot of the bands who tour in Europe, they sell a lot of stuff in Germany, and they make it a point to go to Germany because those are good places. I've never been to the Netherlands, but I have heard that that's another country where that's a big deal, the Netherlands. But Mexico for sure is not big in prog. The US is not, or Canada. But yeah, those would be the ones that I've been to. Brazil, nothing. Brazil is a great country. I highly recommend visiting it, but nothing. Italy, I thought Italy would for sure, right? With all the Italian prog, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing at all. So yeah. But I have always been curious about Japan, though. I've never been to Japan. I don't know what that's like. To me, it's almost like going to another planet. I would love to. I would love to go. I am sure I would do everything wrong because these are very traditional people. But I would still like to go and check it out because some of those record stores are I mean, just from looking at them online, they look incredible. Incredible.
I think the Virgin store is like 5 stories, and it's a
Yeah.
record store
Wow.
everywhere.
Yes.
All the way up.
So, you know, and
This
they
thing-
sell everything.
Disc Union has a progressive rock store.
Even small time bands like mine, when the Japanese, in my experience, have a very strict "we don't call us, we call you" mentality. So you can send them 100 emails, they will never reply, but then they will write to you and they will ask you for very specific things. And one of the specific things they always ask is, can you give us a record with a special song for Japan? And I'm like, well, yeah, I can, but you know, do you know how much it costs to print a special album for Japan with a special song for Japan? I mean, how many do you want? And that's normally where the conversations break down. But I would love to check that out, because I know people there love to collect, and they, when they like something, they are very passionate about it. That's for sure.
All right, Chad. According to you, for all Nearfest editions, which are the 5 bands that most amazed the attendance that you could tell from being, you know,
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because that's obviously pretty subjective. But one right off the bat had to be Sleepy Time Gorilla Museum.
Oh,
Yes.
Like them or not,
Yes.
they surprised the crap out of people that early Sunday morning, and they were phenomenal. They were fun, and they were awesome people. Pete, hold your ears. Like it or not, Magma, I believe, really blew people out of the water. I think there were a lot of people that sat there out of curiosity and were blown away, even while Pete was walking out the door with his ears bleeding. I think Morgable was another one when they opened up in 2010. I'm sorry, 2008. You know, we had a trio with no keyboards, came out and just tore people's heads off. They played 2 songs to start the set without a break. And when they stopped that second one and Christoph said hi to everybody, the place went absolutely bananas. And I think they had 3 encores. Is that right, Ken?
2. I think it was 2.
It was pretty awesome. One that's maybe not as obvious is Myriador. I think there were a lot of people that were not they didn't really know who they were. Some did, some didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But when they performed, their style of quirkiness, you know, their quirky brand of progressive rock. There's something about there's enough melody in their stuff with the weirdness that people really latched onto. And I've heard a lot of people over the years saying that Myriador is one of their favorites.
I'm one of them, Chad. They killed me. I loved them.
Yeah, they were great. And another one, probably up there with Magma, even though they're known, was Bonko. And I think there was a lot of emotion behind that, especially the first time they played in 2000. Was that 2001 or 2000?
2001.
2001, yeah. I mean, even DiGiacomo cried on stage.
Yeah. I cried in the fucking stands, like
people
that chick on prom night.
They were so blown away to be able to see them, and there's so much emotion in their music anyway, and it was just mind blowing. The people were just so emotional and happy to see them, that I think, even though they knew what Bonko was, seeing them, I don't think they expected this rush of emotion as part of the audience, and I think that was part of the surprise, and it really elevated them to one of the top bands that ever played.
I had no idea who they were.
Really?
And in fact, me and Jeff were looking at each other and we were thinking, we're going to give them 3 songs. If the third one sucks, we'll beat the traffic. That was our arrangement.
Let me ask you guys, for those of you who came, give me your top 2 surprises.
I think for me, Myriador was a huge surprise, and I want to say Birdsongs.
Oh, good one.
I really liked them too. And usually I tried to buy stuff of the bands before going, and Birdsongs, I hadn't heard a thing.
Do you have the live album that we put out?
Yes.
Okay.
That's a great question. God, biggest surprise. So I'm thinking you mean like by a band you probably didn't really know all that well, right?
That's probably the easiest way to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember Spaced Out blew my mind live. I was like really into them. God, what else? Frog Cafe, I really dug a lot.
Spaceballs was one for me. I mean, I knew
that was good. I was going to go there next. Yeah, that was really good because I had never heard them before.
Yeah.
Which band was that?
Spaceball.
Yeah,
Amazing band.
They were a Sunday opener, right?
They were.
Yep.
They almost didn't make it. Their instruments almost didn't make it.
I didn't really know anything about Magma. I know that Chris Lamka sold me a CD of them once many years ago. That's when I would just listen to something, and if I didn't like it, it was gone. And that's what happened to that CD. It was Magma live at the BBC, and I thought I hated it. So when we were there, it was the same thing. It was like, all right, here we go, fucking Magma. And we had that arrangement. Like, all right, we don't have to sit through all of it, right? There's Ed's Cadillac of Beer, so we can always go hit that. And no, it was a life-changing gig for sure.
I didn't have any surprises, but the Bartok performance for me was one of the greatest shows I've ever seen.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Banco, I didn't know anything. It completely blew my mind.
That gave me douche chills. That was
I think most memorable Banco for sure. Anglagard for me was incredible. Happy the Man was incredible. I mean, Nectar were great that first time.
First Steve Hackett was great.
Yeah. There were some really good memorable ones.
Solaris was great. There were a lot of
that was.
You forget there were so many bands.
Yeah.
You guys spoiled us. I always told people you shouldn't take this shit for granted, because when it's gone, it's gonna leave a fucking black hole in your chest.
It's been gone for 11 years, Luis. It's been 11 years since the last one.
Yeah, I still fucking miss it.
It left a big impact on so many of us who went year after year after year, right? It just made it was something to look forward to. It was like a little mini guy's vacation away every year to listen to this cool, nerdy, obscure music and hang out with fellow nerds and drink all weekend and hang out with the bands. And it was a great time every year.
The scarier thing is the first one was 24 years ago. 24.
And it's funny because as charming as the first one was, I'm sure you guys look back on it and think, wow, what a disaster that was, right?
Oh, well, I say to Rob, I said, how the hell did we pull that off? You were there until 3 a.m. picking up trash.
Oh my God, it was like 110 degrees in the venue.
We were picking up trash, went home and slept on the floor. Rob and his wife slept on the floor in my basement. And we came back, we were back there by like 7 o'clock the next morning. We slept for like 4 hours.
It's crazy.
Unbelievable.
All right, George, you knew this was coming. If you could only choose one, what would be your favorite Japanese prog or fusion band?
Prague is Kenzo, easily. Fusion is either Fragile or Hiromi. Can't really pick. Different. They're good in different ways.
That's a great answer.
It is a great answer. And tune in Friday too. Well, actually, by the time this episode is airing, it'll have already aired. But if you didn't catch 4 Fusion Friday last week, make sure to check it out because we talk about both of those acts in that particular episode. So, all right, cool. Let's see. We were running low on time, so let's see what we got here. Let me pick something else. George, I'll hit you up one more time. Favorite Tony McAlpine guitar solo or moment?
Maybe the solo in the song Cab. That one always sticks with me. Or there's a solo on the first album in The Stranger that always got to me. One of those two, probably.
Good choices. Chuck, and this is from Matthew Jacamiak. Again, you may not know off the top of your head. Favorite Pierre Morel drum performance?
Oh man, what's today? We could also talk about Shamal or anything that he downwind. The man was a beast, man. I just wish that more people knew about how great of a drummer he was, man. One of the songs that I always think about with him and so is the stuff that he played on the live, etc. He was an amazing drummer, man. But I would say that some of my favorite songs, some of my favorite drumming from him was on You, Gong's You.
Cool. Stephen, and I guess Stephen and Eric, why do you think Gentle Giant had difficulty transitioning to a larger audience like Yes and Genesis successfully did? And what are some of the things they could have done looking back, which would have gained them more fans and longevity?
Compromised, but that wasn't the point.
Right.
I would suggest that to me, if they wanted to put in hooks, well, they have hooks, but those kind of songs and sing along choruses and all that kind of stuff in a much more blatant fashion than they did. Yeah, they could have compromised, and they did later on. People didn't like it, so it was destined not to be. Go and be true to yourself, and that's as simple as that. And if people get it, they get it, and if they don't, they don't.
Yep.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, that's a great answer, actually, because you saw what they did when they did compromise, and they lost the fans they had. I don't think they gained any new ones, or very few, right? So I think the only thing I could point out maybe is Derek's voice, but I like
his
bust
voice.
on singers. I like his voice. I think it works in Gentle Giant, but he's probably not a true frontman, great vocalist, but I think he works for that band.
I'll give the answer I gave Gary Green when we were having beers here in Chicago. Once you get drunk, you can start to really level, right? And I told them I will never forgive them for giving up. They should have just stuck to it. They should have never compromised. They should have just continued doing what they were doing. And we would have had so many more incredible fucking records, you know.
Now, what did Gary say to that?
Gary just looked at me and shook his head and said, "Well, you had to be there." I said, "No, I don't know. I'm just telling you. You know, look at the reality you're living in now. Look at all the people you thought didn't exist, but here we are."
I love the band.
And
Civilian, in my opinion, was a great album. I loved it.
I love Civilian. I just think they should have never done what Steven suggested, which they did. That's what fucked them. They should have just stayed true, because they were so unique and so wonderful.
And who would have released it?
Well, you know,
Part of it. Yeah.
they would have gone they would have gone through some hardship like other people. Eventually things would have come around. But you see, that's the thing. They were not supposed to be a massively successful band commercially. They were a massively successful band artistically. And that was the point. Like, who the fuck else does that? Nobody, just them. So I just had to tell him that. I'm glad I got a chance to tell him. And Gary, if you're watching it, you know, I was drunk, but I meant it. I'm not drunk now. You should have not given up.
All right, and our last question before we go here. This is from Merlin Man 7300. Why do you guys keep peddling the myth that there's such a thing as American prog? Kansas Sticks, et cetera, are AOR, nowhere near prog. Canadian Giants, Rush sound proggy, but they're copying what went on a few years before them and are not progressive at all. They're all accomplished musicians, undoubtedly, but prog, no. By a raise of hands, who thinks Rush, Sticks, and Kansas are either prog or do plenty of prog? And I'll throw Happy the Man in there too, and Star Castle and all these other bands. I mean, come on.
Crack
This
the
whole
Sky.
idea that there are
Crack the Sky, even the Tubes, man.
Yep.
Yeah.
Come on.
Todd Rundgren,
Funkadelic.
Utopia. I mean, there's plenty of great. You know, there's a lot of folks
Utopia.
who
That
think
Rundgren
there's
Utopia.
never a
That wasn't
US
prog?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, to his point, Styx was much more progressive in their early days, and they had some elements up until the mid 70s, and then they lost it. But
The first six
saying that
Kansas.
it's not American prog is just dumb.
Are you calling Merlin Man 7300 dumb?
Yes.
Yes.
Dare you?
Ken, was that you?
I'm saying his question was dumb. His statement was dumb. He may be a brilliant man, but this was a stupid question.
Yes. I mean,
How
come
about
on. It goes back to that debate. What is prog?
Right.
And even if we just agree to not define it and just talk about something we understand, all the bands we mentioned and many others qualify clearly. I mean, to think Happy the Man is not prog is just beyond the
Just
pale.
because they're from the US, right? Yeah, exactly.
Right. This is ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
And Todd Rundgren's Utopia. We can just rattle them off. right? And you know,
With Rush, they weren't necessarily copying anybody, where they were influenced, just like anybody else was influenced. And you got to give them credit for bringing the heaviness into Prague, which eventually led to prog metal.
Yep.
that's right. The Rush 7/8 birthed prog metal. Without Rush, none of that happens. So that you're exactly right.
Rush sounds like Rush too. I mean, Rush is unique.
Yes,
That first album, get past that,
right?
And you've got a band that stands on their own, whether you like them or not.
Yeah, you know what? Even there's stuff later on that people dismiss after Signals, or even after Grace Under Pressure. You knew it was Rush when you heard it, even though it wasn't Hemispheres or Farewell to Kings. You knew it was a Rush song.
Yeah,
but I wouldn't call it overt prog rock in 1993. But you know,
and I would add to all the Poindexters of the internet who think they know everything. You should try to play some of those fucking songs just to see how easy they are, how nothing they are, and then get back to me. Pick your pick. I don't give a fuck which one. Make sure you film yourself doing it so I can have a drink and laugh.
There you have it. What better way to end this show than that? Some words of wisdom from Louis Nasser. So there you have it, everybody. We got to as many as we could. There's plenty more, but we want to thank you all for your questions. For those who didn't get to hear your question picked, maybe next time. But this was fun. We haven't done one of these ever, I don't think, on In the Prog Seat. So in fact, we're going to do these Q&A things across all the programs on the channel very soon. So stay tuned for, Hudson Valley Squares, Funhouse, and everything else. So Monsters Den, so on and so forth. So stay tuned for more info on where and when you can submit your questions to the various shows. And tune in 2 weeks from today. We will be doing another album study. Going to turn it over to the professor for his pick.
It's my choice, and we're gonna do Renaissance, Scheherazade.
Songs of Scheherazade, absolutely. So tune in 2 weeks for an album study of Renaissance, Songs from Scheherazade. It's going to be hosted by Ken. And in the meantime, visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, all together.
All the time.
For Chad and Chuck and Ken and George and Stephen and Eric and Louis, I am Pete. Good night, everybody. See you in 2 weeks here on In the Prog Seat. Take care. Bye-bye.